Ya, good morning. Terima kasih sudah hadir. Selamat datang kembali di acara Research Talk Fakultas Psikologi Universitas Indonesia. Pagi ini kita beruntung kita mendapatkan satu lagi tamu narasumber pembicara dari luar negeri, tapi beliau sedang hadir di kampus di Fakultas Psikologi UI Depok. Seperti yang Ibu dan Bapak semua sudah baca mungkin di poster kegiatan atau informasi tentang kegiatan Research Talk pagi ini, saya akan perkenalkan sedikit pembicara kita, narasumber kita. Beliau adalah, dan kebetulan beliau sudah ada di samping saya, Profesor Christopher Sonn, Profesor Chris, saya biasa memanggil beliau adalah Chris. Chris datang dari Melbourne, Australia. Chris adalah profesor atau guru besar di Victoria University, Melbourne. Dan memang kebetulan ada koneksi personal antara saya dan Chris. Selain kami mirip secara visual, secara penampakan, we like twins.
Yes.
Yes.
My brother.
Yeah, soul brother. Ya, Chris memang dulu adalah mantan supervisor saya ketika saya mengambil studi di Victoria University. Bidang spesialisasi Chris adalah psikologi komunitas, community psychology, cultural psychology. Chris banyak meneliti hal-hal yang berkaitan dengan pengaruh komunitas, pengaruh budaya. Dan hari ini Chris akan sharing beberapa studi atau project yang dia sudah lakukan. Tapi sebelumnya saya juga ingin sedikit perkenalkan bahwa saat ini selain Chris mengajar di Victoria University Melbourne, Australia, Chris juga adalah saat ini menjadi chair dari panel dari International Community Psychology yang salah satu tugasnya adalah mempersiapkan International Conference on Community Psychology. Jadi ini juga informasi dan undangan buat Ibu dan Bapak yang hadir untuk mungkin nanti bisa cari informasinya dan siapa tahu nanti bisa bergabung di International Conference on Community Psychology yang akan datang, yang diselenggarakan biasanya tiap 2 tahun. Tahun depan, tahun 2024 itu akan dilaksanakan cukup jauh dari Indonesia di Montevideo, Uruguay, ya. Dan itu akan dilaksanakan tiap 2 tahun dan Chris adalah chair dari International Community Psychology saat ini. Without further ado, saya akan segera memberikan ruangan ini dengan mic, dengan space yang ada kepada Chris. So Chris, time, the space is yours.
Thank you, Dicky. Okay, do I have to stand up? Can I? This one. Okay, so all the sound is working fine. I'll sit for a second. Well, is it okay, or do I have to be over there? No, it's fine. So thank you very much, Dicky, for the introduction. Christopher Sonn. I live and work on the land of the Boonwurrung and the Woiwurrung of the Kulin Nations, the First Nations people of Australia. And I would like to acknowledge and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. I'd also like to thank Dicky and the wonderful staff and colleagues at university for hosting me for this week. It's been great. I think your hospitality is surpasses surpasses everything. And so it's been amazing to learn and to spend a few days listening to the plans for psychology year and the work that you all are doing. So I'm also very honored and humbled that I can share with you some of the work that we are doing at Victoria University. Dicky will know that we've got a network at Victoria University called the Community Identity and Displacement Research Network. So this group started when Dicky was there as a postgraduate student. So it's been going for quite some time. It started with an interdisciplinary group of scholars, academics, and a very strong core of Indonesian students doing work in politics, history, and psychology, and then also a group of students doing work in community psychology, feminist methods, and so forth. So the group changes because they all graduated and left, but we continued. So we've continued to work, and we've been building up our research program. So the work that I want to share with you today is sort of based on a trajectory of how we have come to think about community critical or liberation-oriented psychology. So it's very interdisciplinary because it draws from different strands of psychology. We don't say that we only do community psychology because community psychology shares with other critical psychologies a desire for thinking about and doing psychology so that it can enact or participate in social transformation and social change. Yeah. So what I'm going to do today is share with you a project that it's not like we do this research and then we move on. The work is part of a lineage of how we come to develop. What does it mean for us to think, to do, and to create community psychology that responds to the needs and challenges that people in communities face? Yeah. So this is a project that we called, I think we play around with the title a bit, creating well-being, learning by centering knowledge of African and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander creatives. And so creatives are young people who are activists who use culture and arts to work to forward agendas of their respective communities. So the first thing that I'm going to share is just a quick overview of just to orient you in terms of some of the terms and concepts that we use. And then I'll just talk a little bit about this project that we've been developing. It is a work in progress because we're in the middle of the work. Yep. And so we've completed a number of components. Oh, I have to go. Yeah. Oops, here we go. So we've come to think of our work as a sort of solidarity praxis. That's a and the latest piece of work that we published where we outline some of this thinking is in the American Journal of Community Psychology, and we sort of think of solidarity praxis as an ethical sort of orientation about the different ways in which we partner with groups. Yeah, and so there's a way of thinking about solidarity praxis as seeking to stand up for, to advocate for against injustice, to stand up with and to stand up as with communities of people who are marginalized, epistemic communities in their pursuit of self-determination. So there's lots of things around the world, I guess, where we see injustice, inequity, and so forth. And part of community psychology has always been an interest in thinking about how do we mobilize or use psychology in this context. So we're interested in looking at how best do we use the resources that universities have, the resources that researchers bring to communities, so that we can also think about how do we move or push beyond the universal or monological psychology that we have been working with. Yeah. So this is talked about as a Western psychology. And so we're interested in understanding more what are decolonial approaches, what are critical approaches, what are feminist, what are contextual approaches here. So it's fairly interdisciplinary, as you can see. So the idea there, this is like a mind map. These are conversations that I have with, is it okay? Yeah. So these are conversations that we have with our group. And so we map some of the sorts of challenges, the issues within our discipline. And then we also talk about what are the sorts of ways in which people are interested in working differently, in thinking differently and doing differently. And then these are the practices that are coming out of the literature where people are saying that communities who have been excluded from being understood as knowledge producers have got ways of surviving, have got ways of healing, have got ways of protecting and looking after themselves. So for me, when I started with this work, I originally talked about this as community resilience. I thought about it through this framework of resilience, and we talked about the ways in which communities who are struggling find ways to look after themselves and find ways to look after their group members. Yep. So this is the language that comes out of this framework, and I'll talk a little bit more about what this looks like in our process. Oh my God, I'm going on the screen, but it's this one. Okay, so just a little bit of the context for how the work came about. So the work comes out of, I mean, everyone knows about the pandemic, and in Victoria there was a massive lockdown, and I think that they said that our lockdown was probably pretty much to one of the toughest globally. So we were. I mean, it was. Your movement was limited. You couldn't go 5 kilometers out of your home. You were in your home, all that for months on end. So it was really tough. So there's this set of issues that people have identified, and Vic Health in particular, about the fact that this reality has fractured the social worlds of many people, especially those between ages of 15 to 25. It has exacerbated existing structural and systemic harm. So people are really struggling, were already struggling. For them, the impact was even worse. Yeah, systemic harms, inequalities, and discrimination faced by those communities in terms of police surveilling, locking people in, and so forth. And it's also revealed deep problematic lack of understanding of communities whose marginalization places them at the greatest risk. Yeah, we don't understand these communities. Okay, so in parallel to this, there's also been a massive growth in literature in public health in a whole number of areas, saying that the biomedical models, the models that we have for understanding health, have been too narrow. I think 2 weeks ago, when we had the World International Mental Health Day or something. So even there, the World Health Organization and the United Nations launched a document that talks about the need that we need community-informed and community-based approaches, because the biomedical and approaches for hospitalization. Oops, thank you. So it will are limited. Okay, so this comes out of which journal? I don't know, one of the, I can't remember now. So we need to reimagine mental health paradigms and systems that broadens the narrow box in which mental health has been put by policymakers and the health system. There's a need for those in public health to learn from the strategies employed and deployed by those in marginalized communities to resist harm and engage in healing practices and increase communal well-being. Yep. So in our context, the work that we've been doing has been typically with Indigenous communities, migrant communities, who are differently positioned in the Australian society. Okay, so as I've said before, with that little octopus, the thing with the tentacles. So our work, I mean, everyone's work grows as you engage and deepen your explorations in your discipline. And so for me, I started off and I keep on returning to liberation psychology or community psychology. And then there's also the language around decolonization. And it's not, I mean, it seems like it's new, but it's been around for as long as colonization has been, because there's always been decolonial activity, yeah, or protect activity aimed at resisting, yeah, and looking after. So we draw from decolonial and other critical perspectives, and some of this will be articulated in how we've conceptualized decolonial work. We center dialogical approaches. It's transdisciplinary, so we don't stay in the channel of just psychology, because we work with historians or politicians or arts workers, yeah? Because psychology alone is too limited to understand and tackle the challenges that we face in the world today. So we draw from concepts, that's global and that is local, and we are interested in how can psychology be activist. We are concerned with approaches that are justice oriented. Yes, so we are very explicit in saying that, look, we are concerned with issues of justice, and have generated conceptual tools that speak to the ways that communities create generative spaces and settings, the way in which they are responsive. Dicky, what is the term that you use here? Being human? So Nyuwonke is, I think, perhaps the expression. Yes, the Japanese. So that's the expression, I guess, that's embodied in some of these concepts. Yeah, it's some of these concepts. So working together and the ways in which people work together to re-signify the world. Okay, so that's some of that context and some of the academic space. So the work that we're doing is with our partner, Vic Health, and Vic Health, we've been accompanying them for maybe 10 years or more. And so they've been interested in how are we going to contribute to young people, to addressing the issues of mental health and the social disconnection. So they've created this program and process of centering equity, centering co-design, and centering partnership. And so these are principles for how they will fund development and projects that are community-based and community-grounded. So we came up with a process, and we said, well, what we can do is we can go back into the literature as the first port of call, and we can speak with young people about what it will mean for them to be doing community engaged work. So this first part for us was to specifically go to the literature to see what is it that the literature tells us about. Oops. All good? The audience. So what is it that the literature tells us about well-being, about art and practices of inclusion? Yep. So this is just a typical process. I don't know, people will do scoping reviews and all of that, but this is, so we looked at a very specific literature and asked very specific questions. And then we also said that the literature tells one story, but we also want to know what is it that people do in their everyday lives and how do we learn from them and how do we put these two things together as we imagine what programs can look like. Yeah. Okay, so from this engagement with the literature, and I think it's partly our conceptual thinking too, we sort of identified a set of ethical and epistemological orientations, yeah, the values or the principles that informs the work that people have reported in the literature base about what is it that they do, how do they do it, and what makes it decolonial or critical or feminist or critical race informed. And so we organize this in terms of three concepts: communality, relationality, and critical reflexivity. So these all have to be understood, I guess, in context as well. So we talked about communality as a principle, and this is that we actually respond to oppression by creating communities and connections that prioritize being together and understanding systems. Communities are founded in difference and equality rather than homogeneity. So diversity is quite important. We talk about relationality, and this is process. Nyowonke, process, relationality. Yeah, that's not about distancing, but it's understanding how people can be human together. So this is very important because it's about reciprocity. It's about trust, because often in contexts like Australia, trust is violated. Racism and racialization involves the violation of trust, yeah, based on disrespect. So we are interested in how do you restore and how do you work from principles that honors and values difference. And then I think the other principle here, and this comes out of all of the literature, is about critical reflexivity. Yep. So everything that we read, there is some element of critical reflexivity. So critical is the eye or the attention that you pay to power. Reflexivity is this looking back into how do social systems and practices shape our own positioning and our own subjectivities. Yeah. So it's a very attentive to who we are in relationships. So these were some of the principles that we saw across the different literatures. Whenever people did this work, they were concerned with communality, what undermines communality and what produces communality. How do we work from a basis that centers dialogue and relationship as opposed to monologue and expertise? And then critical reflexivity as the other principle that's there. And critical reflexivity is always organized and involved with or concerned with power and how it is expressed. Okay, let me know if I talk too fast. Too fast? A bit. Okay, so I'll slow. So the other thing that we look for in the literature, so the first one was, okay, what are the principles that's common across when people say they do decolonial work or they do critical work? Then we looked at what are the sorts of mechanisms, what are the things that they do that they say produces change? And so we came up with these things. Everyone talks about the creation of safe spaces, yep, and processes. And so if you are familiar with feminist writing, with Black people's writing and so forth, Balluk and lots of other people talk about home places and safe places. Yeah, what are those places where people go and they have opportunities for respite? They are away from the harms of dominant social arrangements. They talk about those spaces, and they also talk about, in the community psychology especially, and this particular mechanism, critical consciousness or conscientization that comes out of, or maybe people will know it from the Freirean writing, consciousness raising, awareness raising. And people say in these contexts, a lot of work that people do together is about arming people and teaching them to understand how power works in their lives, yeah, and how power operates. So in a lot of these settings, art becomes the vehicle for creating settings, for doing this part here. And then the other part that is really important, I think, and for me, this has always been part of the way that I think about knowledge creation, knowledge generation. So storytelling and meaning making. So in our research, we often look at measurement, and the other part of our work is how do we understand meaning? How do we understand experience? So this one here, storytelling, processes and practices of meaning making. So in the literature, these were some of the principles that came, that we grouped and created. Yeah. So then we said, okay, how do we use this to now go and work with the different groups of people? But before that, we also said that we have to interview. We have to speak to people who are key informants. So key informants are young people who actually do this work every day, who advocate for their communities, who use art and so on. And so that was our next step. So we interviewed seven at this point, seven young people from the African diaspora. So they come from different countries, different places, and also one person who is First Nations. And so we asked them, we had 1 hour conversations with them, and you can access those conversations because we turn them into podcasts, so you can see them. But what we did in the first instance, we just wanted to see what is it that people say. How do they talk about their own journeys through and coming change agents or working with arts? And so I'll share some of these snippets with you. Okay, so now I think we're going to go to, is it coming? We're going to go to that. Okay, so I'll play some of this. We'll see if it works. It's just short little snippets.
We all just got into the space, and Footscray Arts Centre is like really accommodating and, you know, really helpful in that sense. So we just kind of got to take over, and it felt really transformative because it was it felt like pretty free, you know what I mean? And it was like taking back space, taking up space as well as young Aboriginal people, and we just utilized like the space in a way that like we just wanted it to be seen, like we wanted to be seen.
It didn't play? Too low? Okay. Too low. Okay.
We all just got into the space, and Footscray Arts Centre is like really accommodating and, you know, really helpful in that sense. So we just kind of got to take over, and it felt really transformative because it was it felt like pretty free, you know what I mean? And it was like taking back space, taking up space as well as young Aboriginal people, and we just utilized like the space in a way that like we just wanted it to be seen, like we wanted to be seen.
Okay, so we've got a little bit of a snippet there. So Rosie's voice is really important in this. Rosie is the First Nations artist, and the metaphors or the way that she talks about space, because Aboriginal people are squeezed out of space. So the nation themselves, with our recent referendum, said that you don't have space. You're not recognized in our constitution. So it happens at a national level, and it happens at the smaller level. So the way that she talks here is about the importance of space, the importance of having access to space, and the importance to create and be free in space. And so for them, it is extremely important to have access to space, because it's in those spaces where the activities of creating safe spaces, creating healing spaces, but then also how do we reclaim and how do we reinvest in culture. So this is the story, Rosie's story as an emerging artist, and what it means for her as a young First Nations Aboriginal woman to be able to participate in and to mobilize art for social change. Yeah. So then
we all just got into the space.
There we go. So the next one, Miriam, she's been in the media recently too, because she does amazing work advocating for young people of the African diaspora, teaching them about how to become journalists so that we can report alternative stories about what it means to be African, what it means to be Black people in Australia, because there's a lot of negative media, and often Black people are racialized or stereotyped as culturally incompatible, as refugee, as trauma, as challenging. And so these young people, they want to tell alternative stories about their rich heritage, their rich culture, and their rich ancestry, because a lot of the work and a lot of the dynamic of oppression and racialized oppression and colonialism involves either the erasure of culture, the racialization of people, or the inferiorization. And so for these young people, is they want to tell different stories. Yep, they want to re-narrate and create alternative stories, and art, media, and and public spaces, and being inserted into public spaces in positive ways, as opposed to being inserted by others in a negative way. And so a lot of their work is about this. So Miriam also, her story is really, really powerful. If people want to listen to it, there's a podcast to that. So this is I think, did we put her quote in or not? No.
You know, we're all working together. It's not one person here, another person here. You know what I mean? And I recognize, even in the context of the African diaspora, it's like only certain voices are shared, only certain stories might be shared. And I'm just like, there are people, that have just come out of jail, that are homeless, etc. They have value, they have opinions, they have skills. These people need to be uplifted too, you know.
It is so on point, because I think the dynamics of exclusion typically means that if you become devalued in society, either as homeless, as refugee, as vulnerable, other people will speak for you, or you get excluded from public discourse, or you get excluded as someone who doesn't have things to contribute. So some of her work was about, how do I go into the prison setting to raise awareness about young people from the African diaspora, about their struggles in those settings. And then she brings it out and puts it into the public place. But again, it is about saying, how do we, and this is like, I mean, and she reads, I think when she tells about what informs her, it will be the critical writing, it will be Frantz Fanon, it will be Freirean scholarship, and it is about, how is the wretched of the earth created? How are people created as other, as non-human, or excluded from systems? And so part of the work that she wants to do is, how do we reorient this? Because the systems that we've inherited, the colonial systems, that continues to influence the ways in which we understand ourselves in the Australian context, is still visible, is still present. Yeah. And so the work that these young people are doing is as another other in the Australian context, is looking at, how do we decenter the dominant system, and how do we recenter the systems that our families have inherited because they come from other places, and how do we retrieve some of that? Okay, and then we've got, I don't know, do we have Nakila? No. So this one I have to read because we didn't put the little slide for her. So this is another young woman from Sri Lankan background, ancestry, and she was talking about her emergence and the search for community. Because remember, a lot of the time, or a lot of what happened during COVID was the fracturing, and so she talks about community and said how people found her. And for her, the community was finding a music community of people who make music, artists and creatives and so forth. But it's also about finding alternative trajectories, yeah, not mainstream traditional careers, but other spaces of joy, and spaces where you could actually imagine yourself as working in art and so forth. So this was her, and she does this sort of work now. So she says, it's just like some fun, and fun is really important, I think, especially when working with young people. They would always say, what is the thing that you enjoyed most about that project? We had fun. Yeah. And then other people will say, but and I think sometimes the funders say that, but that's not quite scientific enough. I said, no, fun is extremely important. It's very important to have fun. So it was like very much like this lighthearted, I guess, energy towards it. And then it went from like art galleries, then parties, then like dinners, and then they are interested in creating community, in reconnecting through everyday cultural activities, but things that brings them joy together. Yeah, it's not individual pursuits. This one, I don't have Ruth's picture, but this one is also, so Ruth is Sudanese background, and she works with us currently.
And then I realized art isn't always about you creating something physical. Sometimes art is about you creating something internally. So I realized, you know what, I'm going to create myself. You know, I'm going to create another version of myself. And that's going to be my art practice now. That's going to be an art project, I mean. So when it comes to my art practice, a lot of it is around, you know, tapping into and reclaiming my ancestral, you know, I guess, gift that have been passed on. Art is a language that my soul speaks.
That is so you, I don't know if people are interested in, there's a whole wave of arts-based work, the retrieval of art in therapy, art in community, and so forth. So Ruth also she studied psychology, and then it was rough. It's a rough trip, partly because of the absences, because we'll teach psychology, but the experiences of people are often invisible from our curricula. So people struggle with, how do we connect with this? But the story that she tells is about art as first and foremost a thing that helped her healing, and also re-narrate who she can be in the Australian community, but then also to take that, how do we mobilize this with other people? So you can so all four of those stories, yeah, they four stories that tells you not about formal programs that people are involved with, but the journeys that they've been on in their discovery of thinking about how do we create community, what are the principles that we want to operate and work by, and how do we then collaborate and work with other people so that we can affect change, or contribute to change. So they are experts, they are knowledgeable, they are agents, and they know and they have things to offer. So when we think about this, we think about where does epistemic power come from and who gets to make decisions about what we do and how we do it. And so our intentional task was saying that let's look at what the literature says, and then let's look at how do we put together, how do we create or expand who can be knowledgeable and knowers in this process of creating community together or doing solidarity practice together. So our argument here is that their voices has to be included, not as research participants, but they become co-knowledge producers. They become epistemic agents in our journey of accompanying this project of future reset. Yep. So it's thinking about how do we think outside of the squares about what is knowledge? How do we participate or involve people in its production, and how do we actually expand whose knowledge counts? Because part of the argument is that the university, as the hegemonic knowledge producer, produces limited knowledge, has particular agents and particular investments. And so this is about how do we expand the ecology within which we can produce knowledge, and it's also who are legitimate knowledge agents. Yeah. So this is why we're doing the project in this way, because we're looking and thinking about how do we enact relationality through our practice, and how do we then also understand the effects of power, once we impose meanings versus once we open up to co-construct meanings. Not too fast?
And then I realized.
Okay, so just two more things. So part of what we are learning, so we don't, I mean, psychology has some things to offer, and then other areas, other disciplines, policymakers, people in community, they have things to offer. So part of what we've been exploring also is, I mean, because so much of what we do and as researchers, because there's pressures for us, like the rankings times I read, right? I mean, those global systems, they impact on everyone. But that knowledge that we produce sometimes is for journals, is for professional audience and so forth. These ideas around multimodality, and I mean, we even make the argument that, okay, we have to translate research. Yep. Then it becomes, we're disseminating it. So research gets disseminated. Our argument or mine would be that the whole process of having people in should be a process of, sharing and dissemination as we go through. It's not a thing that happens at the end. At the end, you might have different modalities or different ways of sharing knowledge, but the knowledge production process is always collaborative, always has to involve different voices, and it has to be ethical and relational, because without that, without a dialogical orientation, the other voice is rendered invisible or less than or absent. Yeah. So the process for us is always, how do we engage and how do we understand relational ethics in everything that we do? Yeah. And then we think about, okay, what are the different ways in which we can make voices? Not everyone speaks, not everyone writes, not everyone is articulate, or not everyone speaks the same language. And so all of these things, and we think, well, and some people prefer to express themselves through doing things. Some people prefer to express themselves through creating. And so we look at what are the possibilities for engaging with and using multimodal knowledge production. Yeah. So some people have written about this in the social sciences. The Gergens wrote about this as performative social science. So the social science of doing, it's not, again, just research, gathering information and then reporting. It is the performing, the knowledge production process also through performance, embodiment, and so forth. And so that work is have a long trajectory too, but then other people are much more say that we have to be concerned with power, because everything that happens, social arrangement and so forth, power is imbued with it. So I don't know. So we've gone down this thinking about, okay, well, what happens when we use multimodal things? What happens if we use art? What happens if we use sound? What happens if we create podcasts? Yeah, is it just an output, or is it actually a way of knowing and being and communicating in the world? How does podcasting become a thing of community making? Yep. How does collective podcasting become a process of creating spaces and creating community? Yeah, so it's extremely important that we think about, if it's community psychology and we say that, well, we're going to work with people together, that we always understand that there's always a process of collectivizing experience. Yeah? And how do we account for that? And why do we do that? And then this now is about, in all our work, we end up importing, maybe we should get people to write things, or write poetry, or they will do theater, or they will do graffiti, or they will take photos and so forth. So the reasons for this is that we think that multimodality opens up opportunities for people who have been marginalized to participate. So Miriam, for example, goes into prisons and gets young people to participate there. There's increased abilities to access and represent embodied, affective, and other dimensions of social life that we don't get to when we just write things. Yeah, we just report through. The flexibility of multimodal methods to capture inherently multimodal phenomena. So the fact that we sense, experience the world in different ways. And so this opens up that we can actually convey things in that way. And then the possibilities for political transformation through the production and dissemination. So this is, how do we create exhibitions, podcasts, and so forth that does and influences other spheres. And one other thing to comment on maybe is just that for those who read the critical psychology literature, and Thomas Teo in particular, his version of critical psychology, where he talks about the dominance of psychological sciences and the need for us to invest in psychological humanities, about the sorts of subjectivities and ways of being that's possible once we move from a hyper science to a humanizing science. And he talks, and this is really important for us, because it's like that epistemic agent, that a lot of the work that we do is not just that some people do theorizing, but we can actually theorize the actions and the things that people do together. So theorizing, or knowledge production, or qualitative research as creating those possibilities, for where theorizing itself is a praxis, yeah, or the work that we do itself with other people as a form of solidarity praxis. The researcher themselves become embedded in the settings that they work in, and the desire is to foster and build solidarities, because the goal that we have in common is to create better conditions for people in their communities. And so we think it's extremely important to engage with the sort of thinking that decenters the university in some way and puts the university in a different relationship with the communities that we work for and with. We are part of that community, and we ultimately want them to be part of the university community too. Yeah. So this is where we are. No, we've gone past this, but this is where some of the project is right now. We've created this podcast. We think it's extremely important to amplify the creative young people as agents, as knowers. We value and we want to explore the possibilities of multimodality to reach broader publics, to respond to harmful discourses, racism, sexism, and other forms of structural violence. And we think that the idea of counter storytelling, telling stories from below, that challenges the ones that circulates, is an extremely important vehicle, because often people would say that we are absent from the society that we live in. So this challenges or at least opens the possibilities for belonging and thinking about belonging. I think this is the. Do you want to show this one? And so this is one last thing. So where we are right now, I'll just show you where we are with this project now. But I'm not going to play this. So this is part of the Future Reset website that's at Vic Health. And I showed you, so that literature review that I talked about. Oops. Do you want to go to the web? Oh, it was there, wasn't it? No. Okay. So that's, but it was on. So now what have we got here? Okay. So this is where the literature review is at this website over there. And then we started to look at providing and building up this archive of resources for people. So it's always a process of doing and building up the resources, because we are building capacity for people to do this. We're sharing the resource from the university. And then this is, you get this, we're making films where we have the dialogue about the work that they do, why they do it, how they do it. So that's the three of them. So this is live video. This conversation went for 2 hours, but they reduced it to 20 minutes. That's them. And so you can just see, this is how we're building this up. And then you've got the podcasts. And so, oops, I'll stop this. So the project at the moment is that there's 9 funded projects, and within that is it varies between 6 and 7 arts-based projects in different regions in Victoria. That's funded, and our role is to accompany these groups to design their research and evaluation strategy using this framework and this approach. So we're not in there, we are co-researchers with all of them, and we provide the support for them. So we've had 2 workshops so far about imagining the possibilities, the types of data that they can get, and the sorts of questions that they want to ask about the work that they are doing in their communities. We've got 1 more workshop at the end of this month, and so at that one we're going to have Dicky, you will probably be in Australia when we have it, but Jessica Fernandez is coming, and she'll share with her what youth participatory action research she's been doing and how that can influence and shape their work. So one of the projects already, we are interested in the tensions and challenges that arises when young people have to navigate with systems, with people who are in power, and how that in itself becomes a barrier. Yep. Even though we talk about co-design, participation, that the actual system becomes a barrier to processes of co-design and so forth. So these are the discussions that we're having at the moment. So the project, you can see, is like planned, but it's emergent. It's like, because it's busy with real world with real world actions as it goes, that the research plan itself needs to move. So we draw on emergent thinking, or we draw on creative and open-ended ways of building and supporting the work. But we've got those key coordinates here: communality, relationality, and attention to power through critical reflexivity. And then we can document, because for a lot of these young artists, the change mechanisms are evident, self-evident. So they won't say, "Oh, we're creating space," or that we are resignifying the social world, or that we are, For them, that's just, and so when we come and we theorize with them, so this is the process of co-theorizing, or theorizing as praxis, is extremely important, because it does open up the possibility for joint knowledge production a little bit more. But anyway, so that's probably more than enough now, Dicky. I think that's some of the project, and that's some of the way in which we are creating and thinking about decolonial work, because decolonial work isn't something that you put on, but it's a productive and generative process. And so we're trying to imagine and do this work with a set of coordinates for where we think we can go. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. Terima kasih, Pak Chris. Ya, Ibu dan Bapak sekalian dan teman-teman yang hadir offline ataupun online, tadi kita sudah mendengarkan apa yang dipaparkan oleh Chris. Kalau kita melihat judul dari presentasinya, Creating Wellbeing, di awal-awal dari presentasinya, Chris memaparkan kepada kita kalau dalam pengertian bahwa sebuah penelitian menghasilkan sebuah pengetahuan, ya, di awal Chris intinya bercerita bahwa apa sih well-being itu yang didapatkan dari narasumber atau dari partisipan, atau yang kalau dalam bahasa Chris sebenarnya adalah co-creator atau co-researcher dari penelitian ini. Ya, jadi di bagian awal apa yang kemudian disebut sebagai sebuah well-being bagi anak-anak muda dalam konteks ketika mereka hidup dalam situasi lockdown di Melbourne yang memang termasuk yang paling tough, paling ketat gitu ya. Di situ tadi lewat quote, lalu juga kemudian ada pernyataan secara auditif dari mereka, kita bisa menangkap apa itu yang disebut sebagai well-being buat mereka, ya, khususnya buat mereka yang berlatar belakang kelompok minoritas, migran, dan sebagainya. Itu kita dapatkan. What is well-being? Ya, the first part of Chris presentation. Tetapi kemudian juga yang menarik dari presentasi Chris setelah itu adalah bagaimana kemudian sebetulnya upaya Chris dan teman-temannya melihat ini sebagai sebuah penelitian yang tadi pada dasarnya adalah sebuah knowledge production, memproduksi pengetahuan, dilihat sebagai sebuah upaya tadi sebutnya theorizing in everyday life. Ya, jadi sebetulnya mungkin ini satu tambahan pemahaman ya, kalau mau disebut tambahan. Mungkin kita biasa melihat bahwa penelitian itu ya kita sebagai peneliti menggunakan instrumen, alat ukur, mengambil data, memperoleh data, lalu kemudian dari situ kita menghasilkan pengetahuan yang kita peroleh dari partisipan penelitian kita. Lalu kemudian kita share, kita publikasikan. Nah, terlihat berbeda dengan apa yang dipaparkan oleh Chris bahwa proses pemerolehan pengetahuan, proses membuat teori itu bersifat multimodality. Ya, dan dia tadi paparkan bahwa sebetulnya ya kalau kita melihat partisipan, mereka adalah co-creator, mereka adalah co-researcher, dan kemudian proses data itu didapatkan dan data itu sendiri kemudian dianalisis, itu adalah sebuah proses yang terjadi dalam percakapan, terjadi dalam dialog, ya, terjadi dalam bahkan proses yang maju mundur antara publikasi dan pemerolehan data collection, karena kemudian kita juga bisa lihat yang disebut dengan publikasi atau sharing hasil penelitian itu tidak selalu harus berada di akhir dari sebuah proses penelitian. Gitu ya. Chris cerita bagaimana podcast yang dia lakukan itu juga sebagai satu bentuk sharing, satu bentuk publikasi, dan itu tidak harus terjadi di belakang. Seperti layaknya kalau kita melakukan sebuah penelitian itu bersifat publikasi ilmiah yang kemudian terjadi setelah kita selesai dengan semua proses penelitian yang kita lakukan. Itu kira-kira yang kalau bisa saya ringkas apa itu well-being dan bagaimana kemudian proses penteorian teori well-being itu bisa kita lihat cukup berbeda dengan prinsip tadi multimodality dan praxis of theorizing yang bersifat in everyday life. Oke, silakan teman-teman, Bapak Ibu. Oke, Chris, what do you want to say? Oke, yep. Yep. That one, Chris? Okay. Chris want to say something about it?
Well, I think since you mentioned it at the start, I'm just going to just wanted to show people that this is what Dicky was referring to before, and this is a community psychology network that is global and started off with the first conference in 2000 where in Puerto Rico. Since that time, there's a group around the world who's been developing this, and this is the web-based project that we've been developing to create an archive of all of the things we've projects so far. So you can see there's
The Melbourne one you want to say?
yeah, to show the Melbourne one. Not happy with me right now. but people can go. So this is content visualization. This is the podcast that keeps evolving. So there's multiple projects. There's the project that Tiffany is leading. There's a new bank of. Oh, the battery's gone. So we've got technological issues. So so this is work from Europe. I think this is another collective project, and then that's some stuff from South America where people are pulling together. And this is a project that Doug Perkins, he's got a lot of stuff from Asia and community studies in the Asian region. So this is just an archive that we've been creating that shows you the different conferences. And the Melbourne one, the good thing about the Melbourne one, the bad thing about it, we couldn't have it in person. The good thing about it is that we've got all of the presentations on video. That they've all been recorded. So I just thought I'd share that too, because Dicky mentioned it. And the next conference is going to be, the call for papers should be out, and it will be in Uruguay. So Dicky said it's too far, but I said, if you fly to Melbourne, you can fly straight to Santiago. It's direct. So this is So these were the keynote talks. You see, Monica Marian Ingram was one of the presenters there too. So we didn't have one keynote; we had panels, too, from different areas. Anyways, I thought I'd share that with you so people can, get a sense of the building of this collective.
Saya mau cerita sedikit tentang ICCP ini. Setahu saya ini agak berbeda memang dengan conference yang lain. Jadi international community-nya dari ICCP ini itu kemudian membuat website itu menjadi sebuah archive, repository, dan kemudian juga showcasing ya project-project yang terus berlanjut ya dari bisa kemudian dari presentasi yang dilakukan atau ketika orang-orang berkumpul bertemu kemudian mereka punya rencana dan mereka kemudian melanjutkan rencana itu menjadi sebuah implementasi, entah itu dalam project-project riset atau kemudian project-project yang lain. Jadi ini menariknya dari ICP dan website conference-nya, dia menjadi sebuah dynamic repository and dynamic archive. Right, Chris? Dan kebetulan saya terlibat baik dalam mengikuti conference dan kemudian juga beberapa project yang terinisiasi setelah conference gitu. Oke, ini sedikit informasi. Dari Indonesia terasa jauh tahun depan di Uruguay, tapi katanya kalau dari Melbourne, how many hours flying from Melbourne, Chris? 12 hours? Ya. 6 jam dari Jakarta, kalau Jakarta ke Melbourne, terus 12 jam ke Santiago, Chile, not yet, dan baru setelah itu Uruguay, ya. Oke, I don't know whether in the chat box there are some question, I don't know, mungkin teman-teman ada yang mau menyampaikan pertanyaan atau tanggapan atau komentar apapun silahkan, ada ya. Oke, so stop share. Okay. Oh, okay. Gita, Gita is my friend. Kita mungkin mau langsung open mic juga nggak apa-apa, Gita. Or Chris, you wanna Gita to open her mic and directly pose her questions or her.
Hi. Hi, Chris. Hi. I've checked the website and I found it is very inspiring, and also in Indonesia is also a lively urban art and culture scene, and it might be great to extract some of the lesson learned from your experience. So, but I imagine that dealing with this young artist as your co-creator might pose challenges. They might be too relaxed in a sense, not familiar with the discipline of the academic research. That might pose some problems as well. And I just would like to know, how do you work with them in terms of doing like time management, priority setting in this research program that you set up, and what are the best practices that you unearthed in dealing with them? Thanks.
So, question. Is that right? Sorry, could you hear me before?
No, I got lost in the middle.
So I said, thank you for that question. So, so the work that we've been doing with this particular group of people have probably been going for about six years. The initial group of young people, and then the work before that was with another agency. So it's a program of work that we have been developing over time, and part of the process for us has been to work with them to create a collective, something that they wanted to operate and run independently. So we've invested to some extent in a PhD student who ended up becoming an ethnographer embedded in the setting. So this person, Dicky knows him, worked with them for 4 years. Over 4 years we did the project. So it wasn't so some of the challenges I think for us at the time was probably more COVID related, because everything had to go offline and online, but they are all very, very, very organized, very committed to their communities first and foremost, because their vision and their goal is that they wanted to create something that they didn't have when they grew up. And so this was their work. So in terms of the time management, we have to fit in with their schedules. And sometimes in academic life it's not always possible, but I build a team with the PhD students or master students, and so organize it in that way. Sometimes the projects go over. We've got a project now that's over time by maybe 6 months or a year. Roshan is one, for example. But we have to, the systems that we operate in have to be flexible, because the research is real world research, and we have to go with their realities also. Sometimes they've got issues in families and meetings have to be cancelled, and we have to go with that. The research has to take primacy, the human relationship has to take primacy. Research becomes secondary in those sorts of scenarios. It's hard to do in a neoliberal system because the system wants you to be efficient on time, and but the real world demands different things from you. So we are working and we are pushing for the flexibility that's needed, because it is a commitment to justice-oriented work. And I think the system sometimes isn't responsive enough, and we have to, once we navigate it, sometimes we just have to ask for extensions, deadlines. But it's hard work, because it's not hard work for us. It's essential work for us to accompany them, because the systems that they have to navigate is really hard and it's really violent. And so the work that we do is research, but it's also has to be accompaniment, because they need to be supported in developing the literacy of how do I understand power, how do I understand racialized power. So our work of providing a space for developing a literacy. This is where the academic stuff becomes important, because we are introducing our discourses and putting them into conversation with theirs, so that they can name the world and have the language to name those experiences. And that, I think, for me, is probably the most important part of the work. It's a long answer.
Silakan kalau ada respon lanjutan.
No, thanks. It's clear. I mean, the dedication is on their supporting them, right? Rather than following a certain strict timetable. Thanks.
Ya, ini mungkin juga ada kaitan dengan yang tadi Chris sebut ya, nguwongke, humanize. Jadi riset bukan hanya sekedar peneliti bertemu dengan partisipannya, melakukan proses penelitian, pengambilan data dan so on, tetapi yang sampaikan riset yes, tapi juga ini harus dilihat sebagai sebuah accompaniment. Nah, yang punya relasi, gitu ya. Oke.
It's a really important question that you ask, and I think the other part of this that I've learned from being with Aboriginal researchers is that first and foremost for them is a responsibility and accountability to their community. The university is a resource. University is colonizing, and the university is a closer to. Could you hear that, or you had Dicky's? So we've learned that. And in the literature that we follow, people talk about epistemic disobedience, or they talk about the importance of the ethical commitment to the people first and the research second. And I think that means that whenever I do this work, I have to be attuned to at what point does my research become an instrument of violence, and at what point, point does the research become an instrument of liberation? I think.
Yes.
Yeah. So the ethical aspects of it is extremely important to navigate. Yeah.
Oke.
Thank you so much.
Terima kasih Gita untuk pertanyaannya. Oh di atas ada lagi. Oke. Oh ternyata. Nah silakan kalau mau langsung open mic. Chris, you can read her. The approach that you also just talk about.
Yes, I think what we do in this is that we try to, because now you'll see there's a movement in the literature around lived experience, because so much of what scientists have done is that they've taken and abstracted people's experiences and made them foreign. So now people are saying, well, we need to put lived experience back in. And so part of what we want to do here is that we want to center that people have got experiences and stories, and it's important to understand them. So we might not use the language of expert, but we say that we expand this so that people are also knowers and people are also knowledgeable about their experiences. And those experiences have to be brought into dialogue with our practices in the university. The groups of people, they still engage in the activities after the pandemic. They definitely engage in it, and because they are the ones driving the change processes. They are the ones leading the change processes. So it's not us leading the work, it's them leading it, and we accompanying their process. We are supporting their process.
Okay. Terima kasih Mbak Ratna. Ini peserta yang hadir offline, Theo.
Okay, Chris, thank you very much for your presentation and your sharing about your research. It's really interesting, is because it touched me kind of in spirit level, in my soul, because I personally yes. Personally growing up, I experienced
Yeah.
Okay. Personally, growing up, I experienced some form of discrimination just because of my ethnicity background, and I'm curious, such as I was once threatened by a barber who questioned my ethnicity with a knife in my neck. I was once threatened like that, and that experience really make me feel not comfortable. Hence why I now, ever since that happened, I always only visit certain barbershop that have similar ethnicity as I am, to avoid that situation again. So I'm really curious whether or not your research is also applicable in ethnical conflict. Because personally, I cannot really relate with Western research when they talk about racism and discrimination, because the physical appearance, the black people, the Indian, and the white people, they do have different physical appearance. But us in Indonesia, we kind of sometimes have similar face, similar skin tone. But the thing that makes us different is our language, our culture, and so on. So our accent, and that is the source of discrimination. So the first question is that, is it really applicable also in the ethnical conflict? Also, the second one is that, do you think, this is also differences that happen with Western research, especially in my culture in South Sumatra. I don't know if the involving someone from the community is actually possible, because we when we talk about something that is considered as sensitive topic, regardless, like discrimination, it is hard for us because the people sometimes like to drag our family into the matter. So I was once sharing about my experience that I got discriminated, and I was threatened with a knife on my neck by barbershop. But the people, the ethnic people that do that to me, let's say ethnic A, that that read about my experience, they become combative, and they start talking about my background. Where's my family? Where what school did I go? And they start bringing that up. So, yes, they become combative. And do you have any suggestion? Because I'm really curious to replicate this in my community, to, how to say it, I do not want the younger people or other people in my community experience the same what I experience. So although that experience is traumatic, I do not want to create more conflict. I want to sometimes that discrimination come as from form of prejudice. So I think some psychological intervention, community intervention would help. However, since involving the people from the community itself is kind of risky because the response would be combative and defensive. Do you have any suggestion to make that more how to say it, more safer, at least for the people that willing to participate? Because I do not find that kind of suggestion in Western research, because in Western, being independent is appreciated. Thank you.
I think, Theo, that's a really amazing question. I think closer, people can hear. Yes. So that's an amazing question, and thank you for sharing that experience. I think any experience of of that form of violence, and that's a real form of violence that you experience, is really difficult and challenging. So I appreciate that you're sharing that with us as an example of what discrimination might look like here. What discrimination looks like in this context. I think there are examples from other contexts. I think if you look at research in South Africa, the Mohammed Sidat and that group who do this sort of work in the South African context. I think also some Latin American spaces. There's other model frameworks that might be relevant. I think the issue of racialization, ethnicization, the creation of hierarchies and difference and the devaluing of difference and so forth. So part of the project for you and a part is to explicate, make that clear, create the context for it. I think it will be amazing to understand. But like you say, these topics are not simple, they're not easy topics. They are hard topics, but they are the topics that impacts upon people's lives. Like you have to make decisions about how will you survive. You have to say, I can't be free. I can't take for granted where my mobility and so forth. So maybe there's other people like you, others like you. So for me, I think the first thing is there are probably literature. Well, it doesn't have to be literature basis for understanding this context, but the work that you can do is probably to look at how can I do this research in this context and what do I need to put in place to be able to do it. So that in itself would be innovation and thinking innovatively about how do I do this in a way that will allow for safety. And it would be with people like Dicky and others at this university who can think about if these are important issues for us, how do we research them? You don't have to do it by yourself. I think you need to have a collective of people who work with you on doing these sorts of things.
Okay. We have another questions from Sekar. Sekar, do you want to open your mic and directly pose your questions, please?
Ya, apakah suara saya terdengar?
Dengar.
Ya, oke. Thank you, Pak Dicky. Professor Chris, I'm curious about disseminating data during the research is going. What kind of data we can share during undergoing research, like podcast you did? Because we are not yet come to the result and conclusion. What is the limitation on what we can share or not? And is it okay for the research process? Would it not be contaminated to the nature of the data? Thank you.
Okay, so the research itself sits within, or I would think about it as sitting in the real world, so it's always going to be contaminated. And so with the qualitative project, the information that we gather and the experiences that we document and the questions that we ask of the data will address a different set of questions. This work is going to be evaluated by an external university. So another university will come in and make assessments. The work that we're doing is we are trying to document and keep an accurate or as comprehensive a record of processes of decision making, so that when we write about this, we can be accountable in terms of the rigor of the processes that we've engaged in for theorizing and thinking about the change processes that sits within this work. There's the literature review that we've done. There's a chapter that we've written now about the processes of the work. And we are now, I have to think about the podcasting and the questions that I would ask about what podcasting does for this project. So those are the questions that we would ask. So some of the questions about how does change happen through community? How does change happen through community arts? Is one question, but then we will also ask questions in situ as the project evolves. The issues of contamination, I think, would sit within a framework if we had set this up to be a quasi-experimental type of design study, but it's not that. It is research imagined and thought about in a very different way. And so knowledge production, knowledge construction, and participatory ways of thinking about this. So there's different coordinates and criteria that we need to use for account for what we've done.
Ya, mungkin kalau saya boleh komentar sedikit atas pertanyaan Sekar, mungkin kalau kita berpikir menggunakan logic quant, bahwa data itu harus berkualitas, data itu harus bersih, ya, karena kita biasanya melakukan data cleaning. You know, Chris, in quant usually we do data cleaning, right? That's itu logic kuantitatif, logic kualitatif, dan apalagi kemudian menggunakan framework kerangka berpikir tadi, practice of theorizing in daily life, multimodality. It doesn't really an issue, right, Chris? No.
I think, I mean, and with this, for us, we have to be rigorous and we have to account for the decisions that we make, but the decision making and the criteria for thinking about what makes this good research doesn't come from the positivist or the logical positivist framework. It comes from a framework that asks and requires us to account for the research differently. Some people would say that if you think about post-positive, people don't even worry about these things in post-positivist research. They've gone beyond justifying qualitative research on positivist terms. Yeah. On positivist terms. So I think it's really important that we understand that sometimes when we make judgments about research, quality of research, and often journals do that the criteria that we use are not appropriate for making decisions or judgment about the quality of work. So it's best to think about what paradigm does the work sit within, and how then do I make decisions about what this work has achieved.
Pak Dicky, suaranya belum terdengar.
Ya, terima kasih Sekar untuk pertanyaannya. Thank you Pak Kris untuk tanggapannya, jawabannya. Masih ada tanggapan atau pertanyaan yang lain, bisa langsung open mic, tidak harus menulis di chat lebih dahulu. Bisa langsung open mic atau raise emoji angkat tangan.
Ya, mungkin saya sedikit itu tadi ya, mengkolaborasikan. Jadi kalau di kualitatif itu ya sah-sah saja prosesnya didokumentasikan lalu disebarkan sebelum selesai begitu. Oke. Terima kasih. Thank you, Profesor Chris.
Ya. Jadi tadi poin yang diangkat oleh Chris adalah soal kriteria, ya, rigorous, yang itu kemudian juga berlaku untuk kualitatif, dan ya set of kriterianya berbeda gitu ya. No. Ada lagi kah Ibu Bapak teman-teman? Silakan jika mau langsung juga boleh. Oke. So that's it probably. Di sini ada yang mau tanya Mbak Wuri? Oh enggak. Ya, ya ini sudah berarti 90 menit, hampir 90 menit, almost 90 minutes, Chris, because we started around 9:05, 9:10, so it's now 10:30. So thank you, Chris. No. Ya, saya ingin mengucapkan terima kasih kepada teman-teman, Ibu dan Bapak yang bergabung secara online, secara offline, yang sudah mengalokasikan waktunya, mulai dari kemarin atau 2 hari yang lalu atau 3 hari yang lalu, register, lalu kemudian masuk ke Zoom, Jumat pagi mungkin ada kegiatan lain, tapi disisihkan untuk mendengarkan presentasi Kris yang mungkin mulai terdengar agak tidak biasa atau terdengar mungkin cukup berat karena tidak terbiasa, sesuatu yang mungkin bisa jadi baru didengar hari ini, ada kata soal decoloniality, accompaniment in research, praksis ya, tapi mudah-mudahan apa yang kami buat dalam pertemuan pagi ini, research talk, ini bisa menjadi sesuatu yang bermanfaat buat teman-teman, ibu bapak semua. Dan silahkan jika ingin berkontak lebih lanjut, Chris, do you mind if they want to contact you? No?
Sometimes I'm slow, but sometimes I'm very fast.
Yeah. And do you mind if we post this the recording of into our YouTube, faculty YouTube? Do you mind? Okay.
I think it should be fine.
It should be fine. Okay. And also about your PowerPoint, do you want?
I can share that with people.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay.
I can send you another one.
To other ones, yes, from the previous. Okay.
And if people are interested, we posted some article on that considerable website.
Okay.
So you can get them on that.
Yeah.
So I said that. Somebody is responding. Is that one no good? Oh, sorry, I don't know. I don't know what you heard because the microphone's batteries are flat. So I just said thank you for coming and thank you for your amazingly thoughtful questions. It does make me think about the work that we do, but also how that moves. I don't think we need to. Sometimes I don't think we translate it, but the concepts, and the so the concepts, the processes. Dicky's making me do exercise at the moment, so he says I've sat down for too long. So the concepts, the processes, and that is what we're interested in. How do you actually if the principles are about how do we create a just world, and if our discipline isn't up to it, then it's how do we create together that discipline so that it can attend to some of the challenges and issues that people face. So for me, whether it's qualitative approaches or whether you go beyond qualitative approaches, they are always responsive to, and we create them because we respond to community need. If we come with only the tools that we have and only the paradigms that we have, then we're going to be struggling because they might not fit with the context. So the questions that Theo asked before also is, do we translate this or do we need to understand our context and then create the responses with people in that context? And so for me, that's the generative part and the possibilities of what a transformative social psychology should look like. Yeah. And there again, like I said, often the secondary question is what does it do for the discipline? The primary question is what does it do for the community? Yeah.
I think that's a key message, Chris. Okay. Jadi kita tidak hanya memikirkan soal sains disiplin kita, tetapi juga pada akhirnya yang lebih penting adalah masyarakat, ya, dari setiap aktivitas kita. Baik, sekali lagi terima kasih untuk semuanya yang sudah hadir mengalokasikan waktu. Sampai bertemu di Research Day dan Research Talk berikutnya. Selamat pagi, salam sehat, salam sejahtera. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.